Hello friends of YouTube, welcome back to Mac Truck Bookstop. Today we are talking about the first volume of the ingenioso hidalgo Don Quixote de la Mancha by Miguel de Cervantes, which for the last 3 months or so, my wife and I have been reading very slowly, like an average of half a chapter or chapter per day. And really just taking it all in, reading it out loud in the original Castellano, and it is an experience so far. And I was debating, but I want to break it up into two separate videos because I'm going to take a break, and we're not planning, well, she and I are not planning to start the second volume for a little bit. We're going to give it a couple month break. So the first volume, what I'm referring to, the two volumes that make up the Don Quixote that you buy today, which is like 1,000-page volume, it's made up of two volumes that are 500 pages long or so each, and they are separated by 10 years. Is it 10, 15? I don't know. There is a long separation in which Cervantes wrote the first one and didn't ever plan to write a second volume. That may be debatable, but almost everything is debatable that you say about a nearly 500-year-old, or 500-year-old book, 4 to 500 years. So this is not going to be the only book I read for Spain, but I've wanted to read it for so long, and it's different than I expected. It's so above whether I like it or not. I love some parts of it. There's some parts of it that are really boring to me. There's some parts of it that are really funny, and it's just there's so much in it. And how can I even start to talk about it? Well, the beginning is much how I expected, and for a prospective reader of this book, they say a good translation is John Rutherford. I actually, as my wife and I were reading through it, I did listen sometimes while working and so on, to the John Rutherford version in audio format in English. And yeah, I have to say it's a great translation and helped reinforce the understanding of what I was reading in Spanish. That being said, this review is going to have some spoilers, but it's hard to spoil a book that's almost 500 years old. But I've only read the first volume, of course, half of it, which is, much longer than just about any other book I've read in this project, apart maybe from Water Margin from China. So, even if you do hear something that could be a spoiler, you're probably not going to understand exactly what it means just from what I say about my feelings about it. So, of course, the first thing I thought of when starting to read Don Quixote was how I see much of myself in him in taking on a project like this to read a book from every country, which seems just too ambitious and like something that can't be done, but it has been done. Other people have done it. Quite a few other people have done it from what I can tell. But it's not just doing it, it's understanding the books and also trying to grapple with what is the value of reading in today's world. Don Quixote is he's trying to live out this life, this fantasy of being a horseback knight, grounded in the courtly love and romantic values of a past time period. He's looking backwards. He's looking back at literature that seems like it's becoming obsolete, that most people write off as childish fantasies or not worth anything anymore. And in many ways, I feel like that's the way written literature of the past is going these days. And in some ways, in doing a project like this, I immediately could not help but find myself in Don Quixote as somebody who is kind of trying to revive a medium that seems to be about to become obsolete in the digital age. Whereas I am never sure if where I live in this uncertainty, I have to admire Don Quixote's complete commitment to believing that what he's doing is great and necessary, and it might be insanity. And I don't know if it's a mark of my sanity that as I'm doing this project, I'm still asking myself, what is the worth of reading all these books? Am I just wasting my money and my time? And what's it doing for me? What's it doing for anybody? And it's quite easy to follow that line of thinking into this nihilist, well, we're all going to die, the whole world's going to die someday, and anything you do is pointless. So if that's going to be your train of thought, it's like it's actually not a big leap from destroying what you like and what's interesting to you in your own mind and following down that path of thinking everything is meaningless. It's not a far leap. So it is important, and I'm not just talking about books here, but for everybody to, I think, pay attention to what interests you, and then reading Don Quixote, you can struggle with, do I commit fully to what I'm doing? So here I'm just talking about the beginning when Don Quixote arms it, he creates his armor and helmet and lance out of household objects. He takes his old horse, like me with my stupid little cell phone here and no editing and no ability to edit and knowing nothing about making videos on YouTube. I relate to that. And he goes out into the wilderness, and of course, the point here is that almost everybody can relate to Don Quixote. And when he meets Sancho Panza, of course, this is a relationship that starts to develop, and you immediately kind of put your own best friend, if you have one, in the place of Sancho Panza, or you can almost look at them as entities of the same mind, talking and having a conversation with each other. And it's really interesting because even Sancho Panza while he is kind of the stereotype buddy, or in some ways, like, back when I read Lord of the Rings when I was younger, I see Samwise Gamgee as a real caricature of like a Sancho Panza type of person. So this like very loyal friend who's getting the other friend out of trouble or trying to save them, and just, die hard loyal to the end. And yet even Sancho Panza was more complicated than that. There's times that he lies to Don Quixote. There's times that the two have some arguments, disagreements on a very serious level. There's times that they threaten each other, and it's a very complicated relationship, more so than just kind of that stereotypical one that they're always kind of known for. Some of the adventures Don Quixote has, the windmills, of course, is the most famous one, where he thinks the windmills are giants. There's no way that can be a spoiler for anybody watching this video. I really hope not. But there's others, like where they see some, I believe, monks in a funeral at night, and Don Quixote, I can't remember if that's exact, it was a while ago, but anyway, it's people during a funeral at night, and they see the torches or something, and they think it's basically some ghosts wandering at night, or Don Quixote does, and he attacks them, and it's just these sort of adventure after adventure where, like, even if you want to take Don Quixote's side, it's like he really sort of sometimes he attacks innocent people or animals, and it's hard to completely take his side. He is still, in my mind, clearly insane, at some points in some respects. So it's at the same time, it's hard to read Don Quixote as completely a hero here, and Sancho Panza as well. Now, if you're going to talk about great female characters, this book was full of them, honestly, which was surprising to me, being the time period. And sometimes I wonder if that's a damaging idea or stereotype that we have of the past. I'm really not trying to go any political way with this at all, but I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of people who will immediately write off Don Quixote as, like, say, just as it's just about two guys and the female characters don't count. No, there's right in the beginning we've got Marcella, who gives an impassioned speech about how why she chooses to go her own way instead of just marrying some rich guy in town. And this rich guy ends up ending his own life because she rejects him, but she defends herself, and in the face of a bunch of people who want to see her as a villain for this. And Don Quixote even takes her side. You have Dorotea later in the story, who's just a fascinating character. It's full of great female characters who demonstrate agency, and but if we want to take kind of the darker side of the modern values that you can see in this, there is definitely a vilifying of, say, like the Moors or the Islamic religion, which, you know, this is Spain in the 1600s, and it's actually remarkable how human Cervantes, who was in the Battle of Lepanto against the Turks, actually fought in that battle, how he sees the human side too of the Moors, and there's a few characters in the novel that show it, but this is a weaker point, I think. And there's one, I think probably the most shocking by today's standards things in the book is when Sancho Panza nonchalantly talks about this hypothetical island that Don Quixote has promised him, or talks about, you know, he's always thinking about that. But there's a part where he imagines Don Quixote, I believe it's marrying the Queen of Ethiopia. This is all like a fantasy, and I won't give a whole lot of context to this, but Sancho nonchalantly imagines himself like selling a bunch of, you know, dark-skinned slaves from his kingdom, and, you know, whatever color skin they are. The idea that he just nonchalantly imagines selling slaves from this make-believe kingdom that he could own, and say, oh, that's perfectly all right, kind of darkens his character, or makes his character seem less appealing than he otherwise would have without that being in there. And I can't help but wonder if that was intentional, or if Cervantes even realized that that was a messed up thing to say, or is showing, because Sancho definitely does have ambition. He wants this island that Don Quixote has promised him, and in this scene, he is imagining what he would do if he had a country. And Sancho is not a rich man. He is a poor man who has had to work for others all his life, and that does not make him an inherently compassionate towards others who are in indentured servitude or even slavery. It's just life, and they are. And in moments like that, it's clear that these are different times, and there are parts of the book that just. If I have to talk about the dialogue, there's some parts of the book where the dialogue and the action feels so freshly written that it could have been this century. There's and I'm even saying in the original Spanish, although there are some differences with how they talk, but this doesn't quite come across in the English version as well. But Don Quixote talks in a Spanish that was an old style for this time period. So Don Quixote is talking in like the Spanish of El Cid, like 1300s, I think, or like far back, right? Like a knight of yore. And everybody else talks in what was modern Spanish at the time, or Castellano, of the Castilian region. And this this yeah, it doesn't quite come across in the English version, and sometimes it feels really fresh, I was saying, but other times, man, like the don't Cervantes writes these just long dialogues where one character will just talk for like, reading this out loud, it's even more apparent, but like one character talking to another for like 5 to 10 minutes of reading out loud just doesn't seem realistic to me. But maybe that's because we live in an age of shortened attention spans and we don't listen to each other talk for 5 to 10 minutes. I don't know if that's something that can be said. I'm just, throwing out my thoughts on this book so far, and it'll be interesting to go back and see what my first impressions were, especially after reading part two and then doing a video on that one. And and the other thing I wanted to talk about is that all of the stories within the stories is what I did not expect from Don Quixote. And there's a point about halfway through, or maybe a little more, where Don Quixote really stops being the center of attention. And there's a few smaller stories within stories that actually interlace and then come to a conclusion at the end, which is at the end of part one, which is really interesting. And they're all love stories. And this all begins with Don Quixote finding a chest that actually has a work by Cervantes in it, I believe. I might be remembering and confusing some details, but regardless, Cervantes is named in the book multiple times. He writes his own name and his own works into the book. Like they'll find a book written by Cervantes in the book of Don Quixote, and then they'll read it. And that actually, of all the love stories, was one that spoke to me the most, because it was about a man already married, and kind of how he, by testing his marriage, begins to destroy it. But I won't tell you how that one ends. And all the other love stories are pre-marriage, are people trying to be with the one that they love. Every love story is a little bit different, and this one in the middle, it's like wherever you're at in life, one of these love stories is going to speak to you more. And Don Quixote's love, for example, for Dulcinea del Toboso, who we never actually meet in this first part, which is amazing to me. I didn't expect that either. You never meet this directly, this woman that Don Quixote supposedly has chosen as his lady, for whom he is going to dedicate all of his deeds, all of his courtly love. That's another kind of love that he represents, and all these other love stories that happen in the book that are stories within the story, told by people that he and Sancho meet. And then there's the supporting characters, the priest and the barber of the village, who are chasing Don Quixote down and trying to bring him home. All this works to build something much more complex and interesting than I ever imagined that this classic actually was. I imagined it was just going to be event after event of, don't just... They present it to us in school like Cervantes wrote this, as Cervantes supposedly claimed, to destroy chivalric novels. He thought chivalric novels were so good, so he stated that this was supposed to be just a satire, and that's it. But there's no way. There's no way this is just a satire. And I'm even more convinced of that after watching the Yale courses. I can't remember his name, but there's a professor who gives just this great summary that I listened to in the last day or two after finishing this first part. And again, I want to state again, reading this first volume has been slow. It's been months in the making. Despite all these other books I'm reading, I think it should give anybody hope who wants to read more that you really can find time for it. I mean, I work I've been working overtime some weeks, 40 to 48 hours. I know a lot of people in the world probably work a lot more than that and don't have the time. I totally get that. But if you're in the United States and you work 40 hours a week, or even 48 hours a week, I can definitely say you can make time for reading these books. And maybe, yeah, it's harder if you have kids and whatever, but it's doable. It's something you can do. I think it should be encouraging, not to judge anyone who can't or just doesn't have an interest, whatever. But yeah. So anyway, back to the book. The much greater than I imagined, much more complex than I imagined. Um, yeah. So it was there were parts of it that spoke to me more, but I'm certain that other people who read this book would find parts of it that speak to them that I maybe passed over or barely thought about. And uh, also the ending was really interesting. The ending of volume one, and thinking like, well, what if this had been it? At the ending, I was left feeling like, you know, this is how I view Don Quixote after just reading part one. I'm talking about this is how I view the character of Don Quixote, right? In a more positive light than negative, because he left his village chasing a dream. He didn't even think of it as a dream. It was his calling. He's somebody who, instead of spending the rest of his life, and he's old by the standards of this day, 50 years old, instead of spending his life, languishing just with the few books he has and not trying to, shake anything up, just kind of living out the rest of his life, he decides to pursue something, to to go out and live. And maybe it's insanity, maybe it's not. You can debate that all day. That's why it's so interesting. But he brings others into his dream and he changes other people's lives. The priest and the barber that go after him, by the people they meet, they learn, they grow. Sancho learns, Sancho grows. And Dorotea and all the people they meet, these love stories, if it weren't for Don Quixote, these all these people never would have come back to meet at the end and we wouldn't have had the endings that happened. And he actually inadvertently appears to have a positive effect on many people. That's what's incredible about the story and very interesting about it. And by the end, it is when Don Quixote, there's kind of this tacked on ending where apparently Don Quixote is shown in a light where he goes off and has some great adventures and he marries Dorotea, not Dorotea, Dulcinea del Toboso. We read his tombstones and things, so it does appear that Cervantes planned this to be the end, but it still feels really tacked on. And it makes me wonder, like, would this have been a classic if Cervantes had stopped there? I don't know. It's just something interesting to think about. There's there's so much more I could discuss and go into. I feel like I'm missing something and leaving something out. I do recommend the slow reading approach to this book, like the one chapter a night or half a chapter, and I'm sure you could do it even quicker if you're not reading out loud like my wife and I were taking turns. So absolutely, I don't need to recommend Don Quixote to you, but I will recommend that way of reading it, and whether you read it in Spanish or English. Yeah, I'm just flipping through it, and it was that novela del curioso impertinente. I'm not sure how that translates in, or I forget how that translates into English, but that was the story that's one of the most memorable to me. And it is presented as a novella of Cervantes within the story of Don Quixote. So they say this is the blueprint for the modern novel. I mean, what else am I going to say about it? I'm not trying to convince you to read it here. I'm just showing you it can be done because I am but a simple man, and I look forward to the second part. But again, we're not going to start that for another couple months, and I'm not going to cross Spain off my calendar yet because I don't feel finished. There's a whole nother volume of Don Quixote to go until the work is finished for Spain. And I also plan to actually read another more contemporary novel for Spain. For those of you who are interested to look it up and have it read for when I talk about it. The author is Cela. I forget his first name, but it's La Colmena, or The Hive in English. And I know I've seen it available at many bookstores. It is definitely easy to find in English. So if that's your preferred language, seek it out. La Colmena by, I want to say Jose Cela, but definitely Cela. Anyway, if I'm wrong about that, sorry. Yeah, that is part 1 of Don Quixote. Thank you for watching, and we'll continue with this video series shortly with a surprise. The next one will be a surprise. I don't know which one it's going to be yet, actually. Okay, bye. Thanks for subscribing and liking. Take care.